Hello everybody, I'm going to be making a video about the single-sided swing arm and rear subframe on my 1991 CBR600 F2. The single-sided swing arm is from a 1995 VFR 750. The rear subframe is from a 07 to 012 CBR600 RR. We'll start with the swing arm. So the first thing I did was I made a stand to lift the frame up, and I did that by getting a 4x4 piece of square steel tube, and I mounted it between the center stand bolt holes. And that just allowed me to lift the entire frame up off the ground. Of course, that lifted the rear wheel off the ground, which is what I intended to do. The next thing I did after all that was suspended was to measure the distance between the ground and what was then the F2 tail, the bottom of the tail, so that I knew where the motorcycle sat. And I measured that on both sides just to make sure there wasn't any difference. Then I measured the distance between the tire and the ground, because I needed the swing arm to sit in pretty close to the exact same position. So I removed the F2 swing arm, took some measurements. The width of the swing arm pivot bolt is what I really needed. And for the VFR swing arm pivot bolt, which was larger in diameter and already had a hole running through the middle of it, some say a 15mm hole. In any case, I ordered a 15mm drill bit and reamer, and I had a toolmaker friend of mine turn this whole thing down, so I had to shorten it considerably. There was a hex portion of that bolt he had to turn down to match the rest of the bolt. There was a spacer on the other side. I had to have him turn that down and put a chamfer in it just so it slides past the seal in the VFR swing arm. Yeah, that's a decent screenshot. So I got the VFR swing arm pivot bolt put in the VFR swing arm, threw it in the bike, pinched it all down, checked its movement, everything was good. Next thing was to work on the shock linkage. So that shock arm is from an F3. The shock link is from an F3. Now the difference between the F2 and the F3 shock arm was the F2 had this center bearing housing welded between the two sides, which made it one piece. So I had to use the F3. Now that center bearing housing is just the end off of a shock link. We'll get to that in a second. So the perch is half-inch thick, 6013. Welded with a 4043 filler. And it's just sort of a part of a circle shape. And I found out what size I needed to make this by installing that bearing housing and letting it drop. So that's how I knew where to put the perch at. Now that shock link in the back, I had to extend that. It was too short. There were some clearance issues between that rear bolt and the swing arm. Can't really see it, but there's about a 1/2 inch clearance there. Yeah, you can't really see it. Maybe you can. Here you go. Yeah. Get you a picture of that. So I extended that about 3/4 of an inch, roughly. So find out where that needed to drop. Excuse me. Had it all pinched down, everything looked good. Pull the VFR swing arm out. Make the shock perch. On the underside of that perch, you'll see I made a knee brace. A knee brace was just for extra support. I wanted to make sure that everything was rigid. It wasn't going to fracture on me. You probably noticed that knee brace was a little bit off center. It's because it is. It's off center relative to the hole that the VFR shock goes through. But it's on center relative to the shock. So after I welded that perch in, came back, tacked in place, trying to talk between the train horns. Tacked in place that center bearing housing, pulled it all back out, pressed out the bearing from the housing, did a final weld on that, put it all back together, checked its movement once again. Everything was fantastic. That's pretty much the VFR swing arm conversion. Next we'll look at the rear subframe. Now for the 07 to 012 CBR600 rear subframe conversion. So the first thing I did for that was I chopped the entire ass end of my motorcycle off. Chopped it here, and I chopped it here. That was kind of an arbitrary location. I just held the tail up to see where it might fit in, and I thought I would just trim, wherever I needed to. After I got the rear subframe fitted in, so for the rear subframe, I had to bolt the gas tank down. just so I could find out where the seat would lie, because I wanted the seat as close to the F2 position as possible, which it got pretty close. Now the tank, it just rests on the frame, so it was almost self-locating between that bolt and it fitting on the frame. And I held the subframe up just by putting a couple of jugs under the subframe and on the top of the tire. That just kind of held it up in place, so I knew where the mounting points would be. To mount this subframe to the F2 frame, I just used all DOM tube. There's a tube that runs from this bolt to the other bolt with a nut welded inside of it. So I pinched that together, set it in place, made some bracing, tacked it all. You can see a vertical brace here that runs down to the tube that runs across. And this is actually the F2 frame. It's a cap. This is a fuel tank support. Fuel tank mounting. On the back side you'll see I welded a tab onto the F2 frame, and there's a nut welded to that. So just test fit, test fit, test fit. Had to chop off part of the tank just so the seat would fit properly in there. That's a CBR600 RR battery. The starter relay fit into the RR position. The ECM, if they call it an ECM, had to chop out the entire servo box, or the servo box, I guess that's what they call it, servo location, and a fiberglass that in. That just gave me some room to work with. It's a Kawasaki voltage regulator. The F2 regulators kept dying on me, so that's an upgrade for sure. Here's what I did with all the wiring. It's cleaned up tremendously. So this is all inputs, and these are all outputs. Of course, I tinned the end of the wires. Everything's labeled. Integrated tail light, turn signals, brake, license plate light with the brake light, integrated blinkers into the rear pegs. I bought those off eBay. The guy who made these did an outstanding job. So shout out to the guy who made those. It's a CBR600 RR exhaust. It's all stainless steel, except for the F2 header. It sounds good. With the CBR600 RR exhaust, there was a good bit of back pressure, and so that caused my bike to run rich. So I ended up gutting the exhaust. I didn't really gut it. I cut a giant hole in the bottom of it, and I made it a little more free-flowing. There's a piece of copper tape here, just as like a heat shield. That license plate bracket is from a different CBR RR. It didn't fit my bike, and the one that fit my bike was ridiculously expensive. So I bought that, bent the hell out of it, made some brackets, and now it fits. And it works great. That pretty much wraps it up. I'm not going to give you a sound clip. It sounds like an F2, really. Maybe a little bit louder. Have fun.